It's time to explore the world according to Glenn. I'm Kevin Jacobsen. Glenn Close is my favorite actress, and this show is all about exploring the career of one of the finest actors of her generation. Each episode, I'll be joined by a guest as we dive into one of Glenn's movies, TV shows, or stage productions, going chronologically through her career, discussing her performance, and assessing the project itself. And today, we're talking Glenn's voice role as Granny in the 2005 animated film Hoodwinked.
Time nominee Glenn Close, motherfuckers.
My guest today is always a joy to have on the show. He is a Sporcle curator who you last heard talking with me on this show about Gandahar, also known as Light Years in English. He is back now to cover yet another animated film of Glenn's. Welcome back, Christof.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to be back.
Thank you so much. How does it feel to be my animation correspondent here?
It's a bit surprising, but I'll take the job gladly.
Yes. Were you offended that I did not ask you for Tarzan or The Simpsons or any of her other voice work?
I'm not offended at all that I didn't have to rewatch Tarzan. I don't remember liking that very much.
Wow. Very rude.
Yeah.
But
very good. Yes.
That's okay.
Well, I would have loved to have a reason to watch as Mona Simpson again, though.
Yes. Well, anyway, we're here to talk Hoodwink, but before we talk that, I know your relationship to Glenn Close, as you told me on your first episode, so now I'm going to ask for you to look to the future here, put on your casting hat, and tell me if you had the power to cast Glenn in a future film, what are we looking at? What do you think?
Well, I tried a while about this, so I wanted to have her in safe hands, wanted to have her with a director who knows how to deal with actresses. And the name that popped into my head was Pedro Almodovar. I see her starring in a movie by Pedro. I see her starring opposite Penelope Cruz. They have the right age gap, but they don't quite read as mother and daughter. But Glenn is, I see her as some kind of authority figure or mentor figure, a professor, a teacher, someone who she had a close relationship with, but fell apart with, and now that she's getting back in touch with to find some dark secret in the past that separated them, and we don't know if Glenn, who is definitely harboring a secret, is not telling her because she wants to save herself or save her. And that's about the situation I see. The rest is in Pedro's hands. I know it will be good. I definitely see this as a co-lead situation, although Penelope has the larger role, and so probably Glenn Close, for Oscar reasons, will get a supporting campaign. But I see this working.
I love this, and I love how much you've thought about, at least you've given Pedro Almodovar a starting point where he can build off of that and add in his twists and turns and soapy elements that he loves.
I must also say, I just saw a few days ago on your Blue Sky that Glenn actually did go the route of gay Spanish directors, which I didn't know when I already had Pedro in mind for her, but happy to see her work with the Harveys. So let's see how that will work out for her.
Yes, and it is worth mentioning before we get into it that she will have a film at the Cannes Film Festival, which is something that never happens. So this is very exciting, even if from what I understand, it's a small role, but I'll take it. It's her first time having a film at Cannes since Things You Can Tell Just by Looking at Her, which is 26 years ago. So very exciting. She's not exactly an Isabelle Huppert figure of Cannes, so it's always exciting when we get her back.
And I'm really interested to see what the Harveys will do with her.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll love her. Yeah. Well, on that note, let us get into what we're here to talk about today, which is Hoodwinked. This is Glenn returning to the world of animation, but there's a lot that happened behind the scenes before this opportunity even got to her. So, Hoodwinked was devised by Corey Edwards after a fellow producer took a liking to his short animated film he had made earlier called Wobots and asked him to pitch ideas for some kind of feature animated film that had a twist on a classic tale. And Corey and his brother Todd came up with a spin on Little Red Riding Hood, and then thought it would be fun to frame it through the lens of some of the great non-linear stories that had come out in the last decade, such as Pulp Fiction and Memento, that sort of thing, and make it a sort of crime drama parody of sorts, where each character has a different side of the story and how things went down. So, another big part of this is that it was entirely independently produced. It was animated in the Philippines, and it allowed them full creative control without having to run anything by major studios and perhaps have the story sanded down. And they had a budget of only $8 million, according to the director, which also means that the animation had to be much cheaper than your traditional mainstream animated movie, which is why it has a sort of crudeness, to be diplomatic about it. It is one of the first computer-generated animated films to be entirely independently funded. So eventually they got their voice cast assembled, and it was originally a very different cast with lesser-known stars compared to who would eventually be heard in the film, including Tara Strong as Red, David Ogden Stiers as the woodsman Kirk, and Sally Struthers as Granny. But then, I regret to inform you that the Weinstein Company got involved, and they encouraged the team and the whole company to take on bigger name stars to bring in a wider audience. So Tara Strong was replaced by Anne Hathaway, David Ogden Stiers was replaced by Jim Belushi, and Sally Struthers was replaced by Glenn Close. But David Ogden Stiers did still remain with the film, but in the role of Detective Flippers. And Patrick Warburton was on board from the beginning as the Wolf, but Glenn was initially a bit puzzled as to why she was brought in to replace Sally Struthers. As Corey Edwards recalls, when Glenn Close walked in, she said, "Why do you need me? Sally did a great job." I didn't want to say, because Harvey made us. So yeah, there you go. And it's interesting too that this isn't the first time this has happened, because as you will recall, Christof, the Weinsteins were the distributors of Gandahar in the US, which was released as Light Years, and he helped get Glenn cast in that voice role as well. So, you know, a rather unfortunate association there, but that's how it shook out. So, having said all that, Hoodwinked is an animated comedy that provides a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood and reimagines it as a whodunit detective story. So it begins with Red visiting her granny's house after an encounter with a seemingly dangerous wolf in the woods, only to find the wolf dressed up as her granny, and her granny tied up in the closet, followed by a woodsman crashing through the window. So a group of detectives, including Detective Flippers, investigate the scene, and we come to learn that they're investigating the mysterious Goody Bandit, who's been stealing recipes from pastry businesses around town and forcing them to shut down. So we then get Red's side of the story first, followed by the wolf, followed by Kirk, the woodsman, followed by Granny. And each has a different version of events, but after Flippers puts the pieces together, the foursome team up to take down the bad guy. So, yes, let's get into it here, Christof. Hoodwinked, what is your relationship to this movie, which you famously own, as you showed me before this? And what do you make of Glenn's performance as Granny?
Well, I own this movie, and I'm not entirely sure why. Two theories. Theory number one, it was on sale and very cheap.
Yep.
Theory number two, I remember it being marketed originally as Little Red Riding Hood told as if it was a Rashomon. And I have a very strong relationship with Rashomon. Rashomon, I always say I have what I like to call a holy trinity of movies which probably I admire even more than anything else, and don't view just as movies, but as something else. And these are 2001: A Space Odyssey, La Strada, and Rashomon. These are very special films. And maybe that inspired me to buy it. And even although when watching it, I have to say, it's not really Rashomon. It's more Pulp Fiction-y, because the thing about Rashomon is that the three different accounts we hear are all contradicting each other, and the accounts we get in Hoodwinked do not contradict each other. They build on one another. But that aside, the idea is still a strong one, I think. It retelling a familiar property, a fairy tale that everyone knows with a different lens, adding dimensions to the characters, building up on that. This should have been a slam dunk. This should have been absolutely great. And I really think it's very well thought out and it's very well plotted. And it has the makings of a classic and a great movie, but it has two huge strikes against it, which are the reason why it ultimately falls flat for me. One thing is what you have already hinted at is the quality of the animation. I understand it was cheap. I understand they had to take care of their money, and I understand that we cannot expect it to look like Pixar, even although Pixar did the year earlier The Incredibles, which is a film, if you just compare the quality of the animation from The Incredibles to Hoodwinked, Hoodwinked doesn't look good.
Mm.
Um, but I wonder if you are so short on money, why do you have so many scenes that are obviously designed to show off quality of animation? Why do you have an avalanche? Why do you have characters swimming in water? Why do you have fire? Why do you have action scenes? Why do you have a climax that is one action scene after another? Um, this doesn't make sense. If you have not a lot of money for animation, don't throw it away for really crunchy action scenes that will just look bad. Just try to make something with the rest that isn't as expensive and doesn't make it as obvious that you don't have any money. The second problem I have with the film is that there's one big problem with the structure, with the timing of it, because if you watch the film, about 45 minutes in, when Granny's story is told, you think, okay, now it's time for the conclusion. But we still have half an hour of movie to go through. So the film decides to just completely skip the approach it had so far, throw in some Mission Impossible stuff, and tax an entirely different movie at the end of it just to avoid clocking in at under an hour. If it were just the right length for the material it has, which is an hour, it could have been great. It probably wouldn't be something you could release theatrically. It would be more something like for a TV slot, probably. So I understand why it doesn't happen. But in this form, with this entire final act, which doesn't really match the first two acts that come before it, I just don't find it in my heart to really praise the film as much as I maybe should be, because the first two thirds are really inventive. There are lots of jokes. I laughed a lot. There's a lot of fun in there. And the plotting of the first two thirds really works very well, but it kind of falls apart in the end for me.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, unfortunately, for this movie. Well, before I get into it, what were your thoughts on Glenn?
Well, Glenn is not the main attraction of this film, I would say. She does her job very well. Glenn plays the granny, and um, in a film like that, you obviously know that Granny has some secrets of her own, just like every character has some secrets of her own. And the first time we hear her talking to Little Red Riding Hood, she has a very granny-like voice where I don't know if I would have recognized it as Glenn Close if I hadn't known it in advance. It's not like Anne Hathaway as Little Red Riding Hood, where she opens her mouth and you know immediately that's Anne Hathaway. She has an old lady voice the first time we speak. When she drops her mask and reveals who she really is, she still has an old lady voice. So the maybe I think a lesser actress would have gone for more of a comedic effect and completely dropped the granny act altogether and then just
Mm-hmm.
try to be a badass after that. But somehow Glenn manages to be a badass while still being recognizable as a granny and recognized the same character, which I think is very neat. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a huge role altogether, so it's not really something. Again, I'm afraid, like last time when I was here, it's a much larger part than the last time that I was here. I have to say that
Certainly.
she has a lot more to do here, but it would be difficult to have less to do than the last time we talked. Uh, it's not a huge role. She does very well with the material she's been given. That's what I would say about Lan.
I agree. Yeah, well, I had never seen this before this week, even though I think I was still keeping up with most of the animated films coming out around that time. It's been 20 years, so I can't remember exactly why I didn't see this, but I would imagine like a cynical 15-year-old me was probably thinking it was just some stupid kids movie and like a ripoff of Shrek, and I just wasn't interested, quite frankly. I don't know if I even knew that Glenn was in it, but even if she was, it wasn't really going to be a draw for me, sorry to say. But I have since come to understand that this is a big movie for Gen Z, and something that like that generation, the one below me, really grew up with and had a real fondness for this. Having watched it for the first time this past week, I can certainly see part of why. It has that kind of randomness in the humor. It's very fast paced, and the storytelling is relatively inventive for a kids movie, and it's clever in a lot of spots in the same way that like Shrek is, but with fewer incessant pop culture references that poorly date the movie like Shrek can have. So there's that. And so I thought it was pretty fun and not as stupid as I was expecting. You know, did I think about anything or resonate with any of the themes here? Not really, but it's relatively clever in a sort of Rashomon Jr. edition sort of way, where like every character is the hero of their own story, and the film has a lot of fun with the editing from those perspectives, even while showing you those same scenes, just from a different angle, you know? So obviously the biggest downside is the animation, as you said, which is very rudimentary. It just does not look good at all, and it looks almost precisely like an early 2000s video game, especially in the action scenes, which, as you said, do look very crunchy, to put it nicely. I also think there is a bit of a smart aleck sort of quality to it at times that I don't always care for. The sort of looking at the camera things that some characters do, the sarcasm, I guess I found myself wishing for something resembling like a more genuine, earnest moment at times, which we don't really get until pretty late into the film with the relationship between Red and Granny. But even that kind of feels half-hearted and shoehorned in a little bit and not really particularly earned. So yeah, and I will agree with you that like I think the real juice of the movie is the editing of the 4 stories. And then from there, even at only 80 minutes, it kind of drags out the climax in a way and becomes a very different movie, as you kind of said, a little more conventional of a movie. So I do think it's pretty funny and like very good diverting entertainment. It's just kind of like one of those movies where I feel like if I didn't grow up with it, I don't have like much of a fondness for it.
I perfectly understand.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware how popular it was really among the younger cohort because, well, I am a few years older than you, so I remember that the reception of it back in the day wasn't particularly good, mostly because of the quality of the animation. So I'm kind of happy to hear and also to see on the Letterboxd rating that it has found an audience that cherishes it because there's good stuff in here. It's not only good stuff, but there's good stuff in here that should be cherished.
Yeah. And I think Glenn's performance is one of them. It will not shock you to learn that I think that she is one of the MVPs of the voice cast. And as you said, she's actually doing a voice. She is transforming her voice in a way that others are not. I think Patrick Warburton is also great, but I think he's always great. And I love that she doesn't use her natural voice like we see sometimes with certain celebrity voice actors in today's animated movies, where it's like, okay, thanks, Anya Taylor-Joy. You're just speaking in your natural voice. Like, I'm not getting anything from this. Glenn, she knows what the assignment is, as she often does, and she goes for it. She puts on the sort of pronounced elderly granny voice that's kind of sweet and a little bit breathier and, you know, clearly trying to conceal that she is this extreme sports enthusiast. And that's where she really turns on the gas and has a lot of fun. And dare I say, you know, it feels like a very early precursor to some of the voice work she would eventually do in Hillbilly Elegy. Like, I thought about that a little bit at times with the accent, just a tiny bit.
I must be honest, I did not think of Hillbilly Elegy when I watched this, but it's mainly because I try not to think about Hillbilly Elegy.
Yeah, it's something that is kind of resonating lately with American politics. It's just kind of on the mind a lot, but it's fine.
I sadly understand.
Yes. Yes, sorry to invoke that film, but yeah, I feel like the energy of like the tough as nails grandma with the grit in her voice, like it's a little bit similar there. But I think it's really dynamic work from her, and I love that she doesn't phone it in. I would imagine Sally Struthers' work was a big reference point for her because Sally kind of has that voice in a lot of her work as well. Like Sally was doing Gilmore Girls at this time and had that energy that was like, oh, don't worry about me, sugar. Like that sort of like, that gritty sort of thing. And I feel like Glenn is slightly evoking that, but putting her own spin on it.
I do. I, as you say, she's one of the MVPs. I must admit, if
Mm,
I had to choose one MVP, it wouldn't be Glenn, but David Ogden Stiers, who I really
mm,
enjoy a lot as the detective who is investigating it and is a bit smirk. He's animated to evoke Hercule Poirot, I want to say, even though he doesn't do a
yes.
Poirot voice at all. But
Hmm.
I really enjoy his sleekness and arrogance as he's going through all this. I think I'm happy that he landed on that role because he really does a lot with it.
Yeah, I would agree. And I like the little cutaway where they explain why he's called Detective Flippers, and it's just him dancing on the dance floor. That's
Yes.
very cute. I like that. I mean, that's some classic Gen Z kind of like random cutaway humor. That's like exactly the demographic for that. So, yeah, I think just to briefly go through the film, I think even like the first moments I found very clearly inspired by Shrek with the kind of like sweet fairy tale tone of the narration and this indication that, oh, this is going to be a little twist on the classic story you thought you knew. And then after we get the familiar setup of Red visiting Granny's house and seeing the wolf dressed up as Granny, she's doing the whole thing about being like, oh, what big eyes and big ears you have. We do get some funny little bits within that where the wolf is being like, all the better to hear your many criticisms, that sort of thing. And it all descends into chaos. Granny bursting out of the closet, the woodsman bursting through, presumably to save them, but not really. And then we get that aftermath with the detectives and the whole goody bandit thing. I have to agree. I love the energy that David Ogden Stiers brings to it. And it's just like, you got these traditional cops coming in at first, but then we get the arrival of this handsomely dressed, sort of urbane, sophisticated frog and doing a take on Hercule Poirot. And so that's really fun. And that's a really fun setup. I like the energy of that. And yeah, some of that is just like, the even in these more like not action scenes, I still am just like, this is going to take a lot of adjusting for the animation itself. We're only in a room and just following characters, and it still feels kind of crunchy, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
and one of the main characters is a grizzly bear, and you need to be told that
Yes.
he's a grizzly bear because he doesn't read like big, bulky, with just a long neck for some reason. Uh,
Yeah.
it's kind of strange. He's also voiced by Exhibit, which is probably the strangest voice casting in this entire film, if not one of the
Yes.
strangest castings ever. I don't understand why we landed on him, but I mean, I'm not. I think Exhibit's best time were the '90s. I don't think he was that big of a draw, and it's such a random supporting character. But you do you, movie.
Yeah, that is one of those just like overthinking, trying to get as many celebrity voice actors in this as possible, and that's where we landed. We also have, worth noting, as the detective Stork, Anthony Anderson, who doesn't really get all that much to do, but I did just want to point it out because Glenn and Anthony Anderson worked together on The Shield that same year.
I don't think there was a lot of working together between them for the film Hoodwinked.
True, true. But it is just fun to see the dynamic there again. Just to go into the stories themselves of these little vignettes we have of starting with Red and getting her side of the story. We get the sort of plucky, generic hero introduction for her. She sings a little I Want song on her way to Granny's. She's delivering for the goodie business that she has, but soon finds out about all the competing businesses are going bankrupt due to these stolen recipes from this bandit. That is where we get the first line from Glenn, where she's calling Granny, and Granny's first line is being like, I don't know what to do. I'm just a tired old lady. And she's really kind of laying it on thick. And I love Glenn's way of overemphasizing the sweetness and how she clearly seems to be hiding something. We're only getting like this little bitty frame of her. So there's clearly like something else is going on that we're not seeing. But then we get this introduction to Boingo the Rabbit, voiced by Andy Dick. Speaking of people of the early 2000s in that very specific time and place, I don't know if today's Gen Z or, younger audiences are aware of Andy Dick very much, but he was very much a thing, playing very similar types of roles to this that are very suspicious and shifty and not so great people. But basically, I think for the adult audience, they're like, I recognize this voice. I recognize this as Andy Dick, and I am already flagging that this means bad news. That's certainly how I felt watching it. I'm like, well, he did it, know.
Not like the film is hiding it very much who actually did it, I think.
No.
You don't have to be a super sleuth to realize that the one character that appears in every single thing, but doesn't actually appear in the end, is probably the one who did it.
Yeah, and that's why I wasn't exactly sure how to take that part of it, because it's just like, it's very obvious just watching literally every single sequence that it's him. But also, am I overanalyzing it because this is just a kid's movie and like, they're not going to pick up on those sorts of things maybe at first? Or is this just kind of sloppy storytelling where they just overemphasize this, so much that it's just so obvious that like...
I think it would be easier to forgive if they wrapped it up after the 4 stories, but by tacking on this entire ending where he's a James Bond supervillain all of a sudden,
right.
it gets a bit grating and probably colors in what comes before it also a bit.
Yes. I do want to also get your take on this sort of diversion that we get in Red's sequence of, we get to a point where Red is in the forest and she's interacted with the wolf and he's kind of scaring her off. Little do we know that there's a very different story behind him screaming at her, but we'll get to that in a bit. It leads to this sequence of Red meeting this singing goat named Japheth, who can't stop singing because of a curse, allegedly. It's very goofy.
It's very goofy. The opening, our introduction to him is when his horns double as a rocking chair, is a very funny visual.
Yes.
And then he breaks into a song called Be Prepared. And I must say, Be Prepared is low-key my favorite part of the entire film. 2005 was a year of only 3 Best Original Song nominees. It was a year when It's Harder Than Ever a Pimp has won. I see absolutely no reason why Be Prepared shouldn't have gotten an Oscar nomination that year, because this is an absolutely fun song, and it is wonderfully performed in a kind of nasal voice singing. I love this a lot. I think it's the only scene that after I've watched the movie, I went on YouTube to watch it again.
Wow. Yeah, I get that. I think he would be definitely a fan favorite, especially for the kids as well. Also just wild that the song is called Be Prepared when they already have a Be Prepared in The Lion King from a decade ago, but that's fine. Yeah, I think the way that he continues to sing every single line, it's sort of like the more it gets to that point, the funnier it gets. Just the kind of doubling down of the bit. And I feel like none of this sequence really factors into much of anything beyond its own thing. But it's a fun way to kind of spice up a lot of the exposition that we might have get, in a more traditional sense, and giving her this alternative path to Granny's house. Although another thing I will say, to nitpick a little bit, I don't love how the movie kind of feels like it's trying to be a musical at times, but then it sort of forgets about that, and then it kind of comes back again like 20 minutes later. It's just very inconsistent. The songs are also really short, so...
And every song has a vibe that doesn't really fit all the other songs in there.
Yeah, so it's a real grab bag. But yeah, I think to continue what I was saying about the humor of it, I think one of the keys to what makes this a hit, again with a Gen Z audience, is the quickness, the randomness of the jokes that feel like could be random asides that don't really have to be there. Like, for example, I wrote down like Red like reading this magazine in a tree when she's talking to the bird, and then she just like tosses it and it hits this car windshield below, which causes the driver to crash, you know? Or obviously, like, you know, the scene earlier when Red asks Flippers why his name is Flippers, and we get that cutaway to him dancing and people cheering for him, go Flippers, and he's just flipping around the dance floor. Like, a lot of stupid little asides here where not everything works, but I think they do really nail the sort of comedic timing of it very well.
It's very fast edited, very quick edited, which is also maybe
Yeah.
part of the reason why we move ahead in the story so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But it really, the editing works very well for the movie until it reaches the point when it probably should stop.
Exactly. Yes. So moving into Wolf's story, I think again Patrick Warburton is the absolute ideal casting for this. That sort of deep voiced, droll tone, the sarcasm, but also he's giving you that sort of film noir-ish feeling too at times with his little narration. But this is where you start to see how, even though it's very goofy and clearly geared towards kids, I don't think it's necessarily cynical or lazy in its storytelling. Like, it is pretty well conceived as that kind of like everyone has their own perception in a way of how things happened, and how like Red is perceived Wolf to be this dangerous predator who was after her granny's goodies or whatever and wanted to eat her. But as Wolf tells his side of the story, he's like this investigative journalist who had been undercover for 6 months investigating this goodie bandit who began to suspect Red of being the bandit. And we also get Twitchy the squirrel here, another kind of fun character for the kids who just speaks a mile a minute in this very high pitch. And at first I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, just like the intensity of this right away. But the kind of hyperactivity, though, and the expressions really did endear me to this hyperactive little squirrel, I must say.
I think they work as a tandem. The wolf and the squirrel. With most other characters in the film, Squirrel would have been maybe too much and too hyperactive, but with
Yeah.
the wolf and his deep voice and his almost stoicism, it works very. They make a very interesting pairing just because they're so different from one another.
Yeah. It's a classic odd couple dynamic that really works, you know? And just the revelation that like he's never had coffee despite his high glenergy. It's very fun. And Wolf gets the mistaken impression that Red is working for her granny to take out the competition because he only hears like these bits and pieces of her conversation with Boingo. And then we see his conversation with Red from his perspective, which is that he roared at her because his tail got like wound up in Twitchy's camera and he like yelped in pain. And that's where you sort of understand, even like because of his love of going undercover, that he might be inspired to, you know, do a little drag and put a dress on and, you know, put the mask of Granny on at the cabin. So, you know, I think those little moments are quite clever of kind of showing you the motivations.
And we literally see him as a wolf in sheep's clothing when he is
Yes.
talking to his contact man who is a sheep. So that's a bit of maybe not even foreshadowing because we see him as Granny at the beginning of the film, but maybe a bit of getting him into that character already.
Right. And also that sheep informant voiced by Oscar nominee Chaz Palminteri. So that's wild. Bullets Over Broadway. Anyway, it's just wild, the actors that pop up in this movie. So then we have Kirk. This is Jim Belushi, and he is playing this like deeply insecure actor and schnitzel truck driver trying to break into the business of acting. Love that he is portrayed as like this very sensitive soul who doesn't want to hurt anyone, and he's mortified when his schnitzel truck is robbed. What did you think of this depiction of Austrian culture with the schnitzel truck and the creepy children who are singing about schnitzel?
It took me honestly a while to figure out that the accent was supposed to be German, even although the way he's dressed should have clued me in. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be Bavarian or Austrian, or whether Americans know the difference between the two. Um,
Fair.
uh, he's a bit Arnold Schwarzenegger in the way he's speaking, but not in the way he's behaving. Um,
Right.
and he looks a bit odd. One eye is clearly bigger than the other eye. He
Hmm.
is. It took me a while to figure out what his deal is, but he really grew on me, and his absolute incompetence when he then has at a later moment has an axe in his hand and doesn't really know what to do with it, and always try clops the stick against the trees. And then he
I know.
one of my favorite side gags is when he reads a book chopping for actors to find
Yeah.
out how to actually use the axe, and then he's chopping down everything inside. He's a fun guy, and he's a fun character to watch.
Yes. And all of that is because he gets this callback to play a woodsman in a commercial. So he goes method with it, and is swinging his axe all around the forest. It is wild that he doesn't even seem to understand how to use an axe at first. Like, using it feels pretty self explanatory, I would say, but, not for this big dumb actor, I guess, is the joke. Also, like, once he starts to really hack up the whole forest, I'm just like, bro, I think you got it. Like, I don't think you need to keep practicing here. Like, when he's chopping down this huge tree and it rolls down the hill after him, I'm like, buddy,
He found the one thing he's good at, so let him have his
I
joy.
guess. I guess, yes. Let people enjoy things. Fair enough. Yeah, and that's, of course, what makes him crash through Granny's window. It's not that he's some big hero. It's just this big dumb lunk, is doing that. So, anyway, that's where we get to Granny. The best part, let's be honest. So, very exciting when we get to Glenn here, and very smartly she is saved for the last of the 4 stories, because you get the buildup of her saving like this kindly old lady through the first 3 stories, even though you might be a little suspicious that something else is going on there. And then we get this reveal of her loving extreme sports, which is very cute. She has the 3Gs tattooed on her neck, and she says, "It's true, I'm not like other grannies. I never did like the quilting bees and the bingo parlors. I'd rather live life to the extreme." And we get this incredible montage of her skydiving and rock climbing and skateboarding and surfing. And she gets all these kind of cheesy lines in the middle of all this, being like, "Time to shred some powder," which is just, I hope she had fun. That's all I want from this.
I think she had fun. She sounds like she had fun. It's this part. I wish I could love it more. This is one of the parts where the crunchy animation comes in quite
Yeah,
hard,
certainly.
because
Yeah.
when she's mountain climbing and surfing and skiing, this is where it throws in several of those action scenes, one right after the other, and they just don't look good, and they really should. So this is a lot more on Glenn's acting here than on what we actually see to make Granny the character that she is.
Yeah, I mean, she is carrying these scenes for me. It's not even really about the visuals at this point. It's just hearing how much fun she's clearly having doing these voices. I mean, I have to, of course, talk about this exchange where she's away and she's off on this extreme, like, snow sports competition for which she's been training for 3 months. And she meets up with her friends again, who are much younger than her, of course. And just some of the lines she has here, it's just like, my goodness, this is like truly early 2000s kids movie dialogue here. Just the way she's like, "What up, my homies? You ready to get spanked?" And then one of the others does the whole thing about, like, "Yeah, you ready to floss that hill, playa?" And she's like, "For shizzle." I'm like, oh, Glenn. Ugh, it's a lot. She calls people player haters. It's wild.
Don't you just want to see footage of her recording those lines?
I really do. I think I would prefer that to the actual animation that we got.
Same, and that's a shame. And I think it would be so much fun to see her record those lines.
Yes, I could see her really just like putting her whole body into those kinds of things. It would be wild. And I do think she really starts to steal the movie a little bit for me here. And I imagine kids, this is where they kind of light up a little bit, even with the crunchy animation. But this big action sequence of her competing in this high-speed ski race, and she's hurling snowballs at her competitors, and she's snowboarding. It's fully insane. And I'm sure it was a nightmare for the animators to make this look passable. But it's fun on its own. That's where we also get Dolph, this rival competitor, really goes after her, and she realizes someone's targeting her, and it leads to her parachuting through the air and finally getting to her house and sliding through her chimney, where she gets wrapped up in the parachute strings, and that's why she was tied up in her closet. So, I just like how these little things kind of come together in this clever-ish sort of way.
And really, and then we'll look at the time when we see it's 45 minutes, and what happens?
Yes.
What happens now? The movie is over now, basically, because that what's been sold on is stopped. So now it's time for David Oxenstairs to hold his Hercule Poirot monologue and tell us that the bunny did it. But
shocker.
Even although we get a moment when it looks like we get the Hercule Poirot monologue, and then we don't get it after all, and the film goes on Mission Impossible mode.
Yeah, I mean, this is the part where I was like, I feel like this all just should have been a short film. Like, truly just make it a 40-minute animated short, and maybe you'll get nominated for an Oscar then, since you didn't with a feature. I just feel like just have it be that clever little vignette style and just sort of leave it at that and have the reveal at the end, or I don't know how you rejigger the ending here to make it more satisfying, but I think that would probably be a better route for this story than trying to stretch the last 30 minutes as much as they could.
I mean, they first try to have an emotional moment between Granny and Red.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fit at all the vibe of the movie so far. And also doesn't really fit what is happening after that. It just feels like we need an emotional moment of the deeply disappointed granddaughter who is so disappointed to find out that her granny is so much fun. Something like that. And then taking off her red hood and leaving the house because she's so disappointed. We did not need that, I would say.
Yeah, or it could have been done in a way that it felt more like the rest of the movie, in a sense. I don't know. It's just really kind of a hard turn where Red is feeling kind of upset that her grandmother is off, as she says, living La Vida Loca, which, again, dated to the 2000s. But yeah, while Red has been stuck being her delivery girl, basically, and she doesn't feel like she has the freedom to move outside of her little hometown here. I'm not entirely sure why, but yeah, that's the vibe. I'm actually quite surprised too that like she isn't more excited that her grandmother is like this extreme sports enthusiast. Like, you'd think she'd be like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, maybe
let me join you.
On one of these.
We'll climb the next mountain together.
Exactly. But instead she gets all morose and walks off, and we get this clumsy little song about red being blue. And yeah, we get like even like a flashback, I think, at that point too, of Red and Granny like bonding over their family tradition of their goodie business, vaguely. And then that's where Red finds that gold medal from Granny in her drawer, which reads like Battle of the Iron Cage Gladiators. I do like Glenn's line reading when she just kind of deadpans to her granddaughter, being like, listen, Munchkin, if there's one thing your granny doesn't do, it's lie and play extreme sports. That is funny. Anyway, yeah, we get the very obvious reveal about Boingo, as you said. He stole all the recipes, and now his plan is to add boingonium, which is to make the products more addictive and then destroy the forest to build his little evil empire. So clearly, so far-fetched and nothing like our world at all. Yeah, that's where he's revealing to Red, having captured her, this whole evil plan he's had, which is very cleverly titled Evil Plan. And then, of course, it's up to the others to team up Mission Impossible style, as you said, and confront him and, of course, save Red. It just becomes very generic, I think, at this point. And I just am, like, checking my watch and seeing when this will be over.
Yeah, especially considering that the first 2/3 of the film had fun ideas and they had unique stances on the characters, and it just doesn't have the energy to pull it to the end. It just feels weirdly thrown in. I hardly made any notes while I was watching it, even although I thought I don't really have much to say about it because nothing much of interest is happening. We get more action scenes, which, as we mentioned a few times before, don't look very good. It's regrettable, and it just leads to the inevitable conclusion that the bad guys get caught and the good guys celebrate.
Yeah, pretty much. You know, I mean, she gets one last nice little line delivery of some sincerity after it's all over when she's telling Red, like, I guess I must have had my eyes shut pretty tight not to see how fast you were growing up. You were really something up there. So, you know, some nice grandmother, granddaughter bonding over their extreme peril. So that's, you know, that's nice. And, you know, it's also funny how everyone is kind of like fully in character as they're giving their statements to the reporters too at the end. Like Red and Granny are both crediting each other as saving the day. The police chief, who was like barely even involved in any of this, is taking full credit because that's what police chiefs tend to do. And Wolf is like plugging his new column to like read all the info on that. The director says that Kirk is like they're in their new ad campaign. And then Detective Flippers has this little Hercule Poirot kind of bon mot of being like, you know, if a tree falls in the forest, there are always three sides to the story: yours, mine, and the trees.
Yeah, it's a nice way to tie a bow on it at the end, and at least
sure.
The one good thing is that we get a brief moment with every character, because some of these characters are really fun, and it's at least a good way to go out.
I think so. And finally, we get the classic setup that we tend to get quite a bit in animated films, with a setup of the sequel, with Flippers asking the gang to join his little team of agents, the Happily Ever After Agency, to go on these top secret missions to help, presumably, help other fairy tale characters have happy endings, something like that. Which I'm like, okay, well, here we go. Couldn't just wrap it up nicely.
And what we do not get is a post-credit scene. We should have gotten a post-credit scene of Boingo.
Yes.
Boingo
Where
in
would
prison.
He be? In jail? In prison. Yeah. Okay.
With some scheme to get out of it.
Yes. Potentially with other evil animals from other stories.
Yes.
Just spitballing.
But yeah. This is the kind of film that needs a post-credit scene or a mid-credit scene. Yeah. And I felt almost betrayed that it didn't have one.
But at least we do get a sequel eventually.
Hooray.
Which we will cover on this very show, perhaps with you as the guest again.
I think I have committed to that already.
Yes, you have. Thank you so much for your commitment to that.
And unlike this one, I don't own the sequel in physical media and have never seen it before, so I'll be fully prepared for I don't know what.
Well, you have to go out by the time we get to that and grab your copy.
Well, chances are they had a bit more money, so the animation will be better.
Yes. Hopefully. If it's not, I would be shocked, because this is pretty rough. And so, yes, any other stray observations on Hoodwinked before we get to the release?
I have mentioned that Be Prepared should have been an Oscar nominee. I'm just gonna
Yes.
mention it again because this is a main takeaway. If you're not watching the movie, at least go to YouTube and watch Be Prepared. It's just a fun musical number. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yes. Be prepared, Hoodwinked, to be specific. Because, they'll have other options for Be Prepared.
That is true, yes. But I think we mainly covered all the points.
I think so. Yeah. So that's Hoodwinked. We would give it like a 2.5 kind of star in general, but it's a very quick 80 minutes. Well, the first 45 minutes are a quick 45 minutes, and then it's the rest of the film. So, well, let's say that.
Exactly like that.
There we go. Yes. Okay. So, Hoodwinked was first released in very limited theaters for a 1-week engagement in the US on December 16th, 2005. This was an Oscar qualifying run. And then it expanded nationwide on January 13th, 2006. So, in its first weekend nationwide, it was number 3 at the box office, raking in $12 million, but it was very close at the top. It was just beaten out by 2 other new releases, Last Holiday and Glory Road.
Movies we still remember very, very well.
Movies that still exist. So some other options that weekend were The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Hostel, Fun with Dick and Jane, King Kong, Tristan and Isolde, Brokeback Mountain, and Cheaper by the Dozen 2. So a real mix of titles there.
Imagine the person who wanted to go watch Hostel, didn't get a ticket, and then watched Hoodwinked instead.
Similar experiences. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, and then, a lot of holdovers there from 2005, as we tend to get in that first few weekends of January. Anyway, Hoodwinked ultimately was a decent box office success, especially when factoring in its low budget. It grossed about $51 million in the US, and it had a worldwide total of $110 million. So that is a pretty nice chunk of change for those guys. And it did get mixed reviews from critics, with the more negative reviews comparing it unfavorably to Shrek, and as pretty much everyone agreed, very bad animation. So, but it was liked by audiences, to be fair. The only award nomination it did get, though, was from the Saturn Awards, which gave it a nomination for Best Animated Film, which it then lost to Corpse Bride. So, that's that. But any thoughts on why you feel like it had that mixed reception? Any thoughts on why it wasn't even really a big hit with critics, but maybe audiences enjoyed it a little more?
Well, I mean, the quality of the animation is a bit hard to overcome. I think
Yeah.
if the animation was better, it could have been a player for at least a nomination for the best animated feature Oscar. But yeah, the quality of the animation is the main problem, and also the pacing, which is just off. This could have really been something great. It has enough ideas to be great, but it just misses the mark ultimately.
Yeah, I'm looking up the 2005 nominees here that we had. There were only 3, as I think you mentioned earlier. We had Corpse Bride, Howl's Moving Castle, and Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, which was the winner. Would you kick out any of those to put in Hoodwinked?
No. I mean,
Okay.
this is. I mean, I'm not. I don't think I'm the biggest fan of Howl's Moving Castle. I think I have to check. There's one Miyazaki movie that I like a lot less than most people. I think it's Howl's Moving Castle, but I'd have to check back on that. At least I don't feel excited about it. But still, no. This is a hard lineup of 3 to crack.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's fine how it is. And I think there was definitely an appetite, though, for this kind of story with families, one that could kind of appeal to all audiences, but especially having that kind of snarky sense of humor that puts a twist on the more earnest, kind of more dramatic, straightforward storytelling of Disney and even Pixar. I wouldn't be surprised if some people actually thought this was DreamWorks and that this was like their spin on Little Red Riding Hood after Shrek.
Yeah. And it's clever. It's very clever for the most part.
Yes.
It's very cleverly told and very well plotted, actually.
Yeah, I think so. But with critics, I mean, the animation, like you said, didn't do it any favors. I also think, honestly, despite the greatness of those 45 minutes, just there isn't a whole lot of room to breathe at times. Like, it just feels like it's going at kind of a breakneck pace. So maybe a little too zany for older critics, perhaps. And I wouldn't call the humor particularly like razor sharp in a way. Like, it is funny in spots, but I don't know if it always hits like it should, you know?
It has a lot of jokes. It goes,
Yes.
and sometimes it has some like side jokes. There's a scene when someone says the line, "We can't just arrest someone because they're looking creepy," and then there's a cutaway to the police office. One is saying to someone, "Do you know the guy we arrested recently? Who, the creepy one? Yes, release him." So it's just these kind
Right.
of jokes that are almost randomly thrown in. Not all of them
Mm-hmm.
work. Some of them do.
Yeah.
It has a decent hit rate with those, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. I also think maybe there's a lack of like character investment from an audience in a sense, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it's very fun, but for me though, it's very plot focused. Even though we are getting these like character stories, I feel like you don't particularly get attached to these particular characters, for me at least,
Probably, yeah.
compared to other like the more mainstream animated films that are more like really ironed out to make sure that the audience is really invested in them.
I mean, that's maybe where comes this cleverness thrown in. So this kind of snarky way of presenting those characters. They're all a bit cool and have this way of presenting themselves as cool. So that it's a bit harder to get emotionally invested in them and their
Yeah.
fortune, which is also maybe why the emotional moment between Red and Granny towards the end feels a bit hollow and fake because we didn't really see them as fully formed characters before.
Right. Yeah.
Could possibly be like that.
I think so. So that's that. It had a mixed reception, but like I said, it was a decent hit and it got a sequel in 2011. So more on that later in this show. So let's get to our last segment where we're going to rate Glenn's performance on a very specific scale. So thinking about her performance and where this sits in her career, would you say her performance as Granny Puckett is such that she's ready for her close-up? Is it low Glenergy? Is it somewhere in the middle of a close but no cigar? Or we have our secret categories now, which are serving in silence, delivering a great supporting performance, or Glenicent, meaning she's good, but the project is not. What do you
I
think?
think I think this is serving in silence. She
Okay.
she is really good at what she does. The material she is given isn't great, but she does the best with it.
Yeah.
I think I listened to the comment. I listened to the commentary track as well, and I think they mentioned that she recorded all her lines in one single day, which kind of
Wow.
tracks also with the budget
Yeah.
that they probably had. Um,
True.
the only other thing the directors mention about her is that they call her a workhorse, which they mean as a compliment.
Yes,
Even
it is. She loves to put in the work. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
well, it's one day of work for her. She created a character very well, and she is a very good part of an altogether not amazing, but also not terribly bad whole. So I think this is serving in silence.
Yeah. This is a little trickier for me. I think I'm also going to go with a serving in silence here, even though she is certainly not silent here in the sense of like she's really, projecting. But her character's presence in the film is relatively silent until her segment, and she really just steals the film when it gets to her story. And I like that she made that choice, like I said, to do something a little different than her natural voice. And, so I think she knows what the tone of the movie is here. It's not this sort of natural, relaxed thing. It's very heightened. It's fairy tale, that kind of world. And she lives up to that. And I think another part of why she wanted to do this was to even have like a nice, yet another film that her daughter could see, because Annie was growing up at this time as well. So, I think that's what made it just a slam dunk for her to agree to do one day of work, as you said, and just have a little fun playing a granny. There you go. So, Christof, thank you so much for joining me. I always love our chats, so really appreciate it. Can't wait to see you on the next one. Hoodwinked, Hood versus Evil.
Can I ask you one question?
Go ahead.
Do you think by this point someone has told Glenn that someone is making a podcast about her?
Yes, I can say with relative certainty, actually, that has happened. And I'm not going to go further into it. It wasn't me, but someone has informed this to her, yes.
Do you think this would make her curious and want to at least listen to one episode? Or do you think
would think. I don't know if she's a big podcast listener, to be honest. So I don't know if this is really her thing. But, putting it out there, would love to talk to you, Glenn.
And do you think if she would check it out, would she seek out a particular episode, or would she just listen to the first thing that comes up when she Googles it?
Oh, God. I don't know. Maybe she listens to the first one to see just like how it all starts or something, or the most recent one. So hopefully she's not checking out. Yeah,
you begin every single episode by saying she's your favorite actress of all time, so you should be fine.
One of the finest actors of her generation, and I mean it every time. And I feel like I've been pretty kind to her in almost every single episode, regardless of the quality of the films. So, yes, any episode you want to listen to, Glenn, feel free.
Yes.
Yes.
I can absolutely recommend a podcast if you're listening. But if you're listening to Glenn, you have listened the Hoodwinked episode until the end. And I think if you're actually listening to the Hoodwinked episode until the end, there's a good chance you've listened to several before already.
Yes. I mean, would recommend Fatal Attraction, would recommend Dangerous Liaisons, 101 Dalmatians, all the big ones as well. Serving in Silence, certainly, that was a fun one. But yeah, we've been having fun. So we'll see where all of this leads, to be continued. Anyway, Christof, thank you for joining me. Where can people find more of you on the internet?
You can find me on Letterboxd, where I'm Christof N, and you can find me on Sporcle, where I am Mr. Whiplash, your curator for the actor and logic subcategories. Also on Blue Sky, but I'm not really posting much there other than the quizzes that I create on Sporcle and maybe some occasional movie-related opinions.
Yes. Well, highly recommend checking out Christof's fine work on Sporcle. Yes. Thank you all so much for listening. You can find me at Kevin_Jacobsen on Twitter and Instagram, just Kevin Jacobsen, no underscore on Blue Sky. You can listen to my Oscar-themed podcast, And the Runner-Up Is, for coverage of every single Best Actress race. That's And the Runner-Up Is on all platforms. And to keep up with the world according to Glenn on social, follow The Glenn Pod. Rate, review, and follow the show on all platforms. And with that, I bid you all adieu.